All right, the easiest way to do Class B subnetting ever. This is going to be amazing. Check it out. Some of you might have seen my Class C video, and this is exactly the same thing, and it's just as simple. You're going to love it. So, like we did on the last one, we put the dots indicating the subnet mask. Remember, on the Class C, we had the 8 bits indicating the last octet in the net mask, the subnet masks. So what we did was we laid out the 8 dots, and then we gave them the bit values. Remember, we did that in the last. So we start with 1 on the right side and count to the left, and make sure we don't forget that. You start from the right and count backwards, giving your bit values and doubling them each time. So times 2, 16 times 2 is 32, times 2 is 64, etc. All right. Now, since we're working with a Class B network instead of a Class C like we were in the last video, we're going to be using both octets. So this is the 4th octet that we worked with last time, and here's the 3rd octet. And you can see they're both zeros in the subnet mask, or this is the net mask, but we're going to make it a subnet mask. So we won't be messing with these two portions. They're already all filled up with ones. 255 equals all ones. That means that all these added up together are 255. So if you add up each one of these all together, you get 255. And the same over here. So right now, these are all turned off. As you can see, they're all zeros. So this side, this half, is the part we're going to be working with. And you can see the network also left these two open because we're going to be working with these two numbers only. So these two numbers in the network are completely separate from our work. Whatever the professor tells you those two numbers are, that's what you're going to use in the network. You won't be changing those numbers. Okay, immediately after setting up my 8 bits and then my other 8 bits for the 3rd octet, I put a dot in between them to separate them so that you know that I'm working right here with these two numbers. I made my network line, and I put n minus 2 because some of the IT classes still require them to take away 2. If you're not required to take away 2, just ignore that or get rid of that. But I do this because most of the people that I help are in that lower end. It's easier for them to understand. So sorry about that. So for the network line, you can put network if you don't have to put the -2. I put n minus 2. And then I start under the first bit, and I'm numbering instead of like we did here when we're creating the numbers for the bits, the bit values. We always start with number 1, and we always start from the right and work to the left, so it's backwards, and we start with 1. But we only do that with the bit value. So when we're working with the networks, we start with 2, and we're going to the right. With networks, we're going just the opposite of the way we numbered these, and we're starting with 2 instead of 1. That's one thing you got to remember. It's very important. So the teacher gave us the numbers 150 and 29, and this is our subnet mask. We're going to go ahead and lay up our next lines. All right, I created the host -2 line, and I kind of had to jam them in here, but you can see that they're separated. The only difference with the network line and the host line is they're going exactly the opposite direction, so that makes it easy enough. So when you lay out your network, they're going the right direction, starting with 2, doubling each time as you go, double, double, double. So it's, if you get stuck and you're trying to remember 8192 times 2 is this number, times 2 is this number, times 2 is this number. And going back, you just look at these numbers up here if you forget. Usually you'll start to memorize these if you have to work with them often. All right, now I'm putting my sitter line here, and this is, I put the B16, but this is my dividing line. Everything on to the left here is hidden because we're already used up. These are the 255s that, you know, they look just like this, but they're all turned on with ones. And these two sets that we're using are the zeros that have been turned off. So, all right, so the professor in this example says, I need 1,000 networks. So we go to the network guy over here. We're going to call him Mr. Network and ask him, Mr. Network, we need 1,000 networks. He's like, no problem. Just slide to the right. And when you find one that's 1,000 or bigger, that's where you want to be. But don't forget, if your class requires it, to take away 2 from the number that you picked to make sure it fits the number he's requested. All right, so I'm sliding over. I'm borrowing as I'm sliding. Borrow, borrow. This is not big enough, not big enough. And I keep going. 256, still not big enough. I'm going to have to go into the next octet. That means that all these are turned on. So now it's the new number is going to be at least, this number here is going to be at least 255 because we're turning them all on here as we go. And then we use this one, turned it on, and this one too. So now we're going to have to put our line here to separate these sides. This is the network side, and this is going to be the host side. And we're going to divide it by the number, because he said he wants 1,000 networks, and we're on the network line, so this is our line. All right, so I drew my line to separate the two sides, because I've said that I needed 1,000 networks, and I'm sliding down the network line, and this is where I put my line. This is my slider. And what's that line tell me? Well, like in the other video, it tells me everything. This is the most amazing part because this is the answer. That line gives you everything you need to know for your Class B answer. So let's go ahead and get started on finding out what it tells us. The first thing it tells us is our sitter number. So the sitter number coincides with the subnet mask that we're going to create here. And as in the Class C video, we're going to do exactly the same thing, but in this case, we have, instead of just one of the octets we're working with, we're going to be using 2 octets. And that's what we're working with here. So we've already turned on all these, so our subnet mask is going to change. Remember in the Class C, when we borrowed bits, we added up the bit numbers that we borrowed and we put them in the subnet mask for the last, because we were working with only in Class C we were just working with the last octet and the dot ended here. That's all we did. Well, in this class we're going to be working with both octets, and to get 1,000 we had to turn on all these bits. I mean, we could have, if we were only looking for 8 networks, we could have got 8,100 hosts. You see, that's, you know, if we were looking for 64 networks, we would have got over 1,000 hosts. And the farther we slide this way, the less hosts you're going to get, but the more networks you're going to get. And vice versa going this way. So he wanted 1,000, we gave him 1,000, and so this is indicating, the line's telling us 1,022 networks for the IT guys that aren't in Cisco. Cisco gets 1,024. How many hosts do you get per network? You get 64 minus 2. The reason they take away 2 is you have to take away 1 for the network and 1 for the broadcast. So you're just getting the range. This is, the hosts are really just the range, and we're going to talk about the range in a minute. So it tells us our sitter number, and it tells us our subnet mask, and we're going to go ahead and make the subnet mask. And remember, all these are turned on, and by turning them on, that's working with the third octet. All of them on is going to make that third octet 255. It's going to make the fourth octet 128 plus 64 is going to be 192. So we're going to, since we're adding up all of these up here, I don't need to circle them because you know we're adding them all up, and when you add them all up, that's immediately 255. You don't have to add. And over here, we're just borrowing 2 bits, so the first 2 bits, the first one is 128 and the second one's 64. So that is going to give us our subnet mask. So let's go ahead and change that. Okay, so now you can see our subnet mask is 255, 255, 255, 192. These two were already filled up, remember, so don't get that confused. These two were zeros, and we just filled up this one. We turned them all on as we went down the line. We were just switching them on, switch, switch, switch. And we switched those two on too. So all these added up for this one. And then we had the period which separates these two. And then the numbers here added up to that. So that's your subnet mask. Very, very important information. But this is a subnet mask which indicates a /26. So no matter what the teacher says, I mean, if the teacher says, I want 500 networks, then you could have slid the line here, between at the 128. If you would have done that, your subnet mask would have just been 255, 255, 255, 128, because you wouldn't have had to add these two together. It just would have been that one, right? And your indicator number here would have been /25. You put the line there. You would have got 500 plus networks, and you would have got 128 subnets, or 126 because you have to take away. That's if you were here. If he said I need 64 networks, they're over here. If I need 12 networks, well, you can't go here. You'd have to go here. See? And if you got 12, you go here, you really get 16, and that's how many hosts there are, or how many there are in a range in each network. But we're working on this example, and I'm going to go ahead and show you how to set up your networks on the worksheet as you go. All right, on your worksheet, usually you'll see something like this, or you might write it out: your networks, your range, and your broadcast. And remember, your original network is 150.29 or whatever he assigned. That's not up to you to assign. .0.0. So the next network we're going to do is going to be 150.29.0 dot our magic number. That's where our magic number comes in. This is another very important piece of the puzzle, and this is what the line tells us is our magic number. So, like I said, our first network, our subnet, is going to be 150.29.0.64 because we're going to be going in increments of 64. So let's begin. All right, so I'm making my networks, and like I said, you're starting at the whatever two numbers he gave you. So I laid them out here, and they just keep going and going. So you're going to get 1,000 networks. You're going to have to, you don't have to write those out. You can just work with these last two digits. I'm sure the professor will be all right with that. But I'm doing it just to make it easier and make it easier for you to see. In the range, I'm not going to do that because I just don't want to jam them all in here. But I'll do that for the broadcast for a few examples. Okay, and like I said, you're starting with the original network, and you're just putting the 64 in place of the last zero, or whatever your magic number is. So if you were to go here, your magic number would be 32. So you'd be doing increments of 32, as far as you can. Like here, if I would put another 64 here, it would have took me too far. And you can only go up to 255. So if you get to 256, obviously that's too far. So once I've got that far, then I have to change the increments here. So I'm just incrementing up by 1 in the third octet, and then to 64, then the 128. Remember, with the 1 in front. So we've done the zeros with these increments. Now we're doing the ones with these increments in the fourth octet, and then the 2s with the increments. So you can see how a subnet would work. And then we need to figure out what the range in the broadcast is, and I'm going to show you how to do that right now, the easiest way. All right, the broadcast is always one less than the next network. So if the network is 150.29.0.128, the broadcast in front of it would be 127, right? 127, because that's one in front of this. Okay, so I did the networks all in order, and the third octet, remember the first two we don't mess with, the third octet just bumps up in increments after we've filled in these. So we're doing this by 64, our magic number, and we're just going down 64 plus 64, and we can't go any farther. 0, 64. So you can see that there's, four of these networks with 1 in the third octet, and then there would be 4 in the 2, etc., etc. All right, and like I said, the broadcast is exactly 1 less than the next network. So if the next network is 0.128, then the broadcast in front of it would be 0.127. So see, they butt against each other. So our range is going to actually fit between here and here. So let's show you how to do that. So my range is my network, my first subnet is this number, 0.64. So the range between my network and my broadcast for my first subnet would be all the numbers, 150.29.0.65 would be the first host, or the first, open IP address for that network. And then it would, you could use up all the 0.66, 67, 16, all the way up to 0.126. And that gives you your first sub network. And it ends with the broadcast at 0.127. How do we know it's 0.127? Because the next network tells us, it shuts it down. It can't go any farther. It has to stop there, because we just did all of our networks first, so we could see that the broadcast only goes up to that. Can't get confused there, because you know that this number butts against this number, which goes against this number, which goes against this number, which goes against this number. So the only, these are in order. The only things that you can't see the numbers are between, the 66 to 125 area. You don't see those numbers, but you know that's the range. All these numbers are usable numbers. This is a network number. This is a broadcast number. That's why we only have 62 instead of 64. There would be 64 in this range, but we've got to use this and this, so we don't get to use those 64. So now all you're doing is jamming in the range from what's here to what's here. So I'm going to show you how to do some more of those as an example, and then you can just do the rest. I can't do 1,000 as for an example, but I'm going to show you how to do several. All right, so the examples continue, and you can see basically what I've done is you've laid out the networks, and then because you have the networks and you can follow what the broadcast is going to be, the very first broadcast is going to be 1 less than the second network. Like I said before, this is something that you want to get used to. So broadcast 1 less than the network, the following networks. So that then you know what the range is going to be, because they have to fit in between here. So if we're working with 2 octets, then this is something that you have to get used to as well. So our first network was 150.29.0.64, our first subnet. So our range is going to be exactly the next number after 64, 0.65, 0.66, 67, 60, etc., all the way to 0.126. Why does it stop at 126? Because the broadcast is 127. Why is the broadcast 127? Because the next network is 128. How do we get 128? Because 64 plus 64 is 128. Plus 64 is 192. And then you start over. So each time it's going to be 0, 64, 128, 192, 0, 64. So that's how you'll know that you're getting all of your networks. So if you were using, let's say the line went here, you would be using the 32. So instead of 64, you'd be going 32, 64, so you would be doing increments of 32. If the line was here, you'd be doing increments of 16 because that's your magic number is next to the bar. You want to make sure you get your magic number right because without that, you're really messed up. If you did put your line here for an example, then your mask would be changed, right? You would add up all these numbers. If you put the line here, you'd add up these 4 numbers, and that would be 240. So the last number would be 240 because this is the last octet. This would still be 255 because you still used all those. So this is the example. You can just keep going. You can see how it is. The range just fits in between, and you really can't make a mistake. And you can see once you get to the end here, because right in front of 0 is 255. So what's in between here, remember you're counting down, so 0, what's right in front of 0? 255, right? So this is something you really can't mess up as long as you make sure that your broadcast is exactly one less than the next network that you created. Create your networks in a line, then the broadcasts, which are one less than and then you jam the range in between. And the range just works like that. So it's very simple to see. And after you filled out this and you get down, you just have to bump up the third octet incrementally. So you can see they're just going up by 1. And that'll continue all the way up until you get to 1,000 networks. That's how you'll show your professor. So if your professor asks you for, what network is a certain IP address, you would go down the line and find the IP address. Like let's say it was 150.29, 169. So it would fit in this subnet, right? 169. So we would say it's in the subnet 150.29.164, right? Because we know it fits in here. If you wanted to know what the broadcast is for our network, for that subnet, we would tell them it's 127. So that's how you would find out exactly what your, if he were to say, he might give you this number, or he might give you a full IP address with a slash indicator, and want you to tell him what subnet that's in. And this is how you do it. First you'd find out where the slash indicator is, because if he gives you the IP address with a slash indicator, well, you already know where to go on the line, right? Or if he tells you the number of networks that he needs, you know where to go because you can slide down on the network line. If he tells you how many hosts he needs in a Class B, you can slide down and look on the host line. Remember, the hosts are always on the right side of the bar. That's the only difference. The networks are on the left, the slash indicators on the left, the magic numbers on the left, and the numbers that you add up are on the left for the subnet mask. This is the subnet mask add up for just for the last octet. All right, last octet. This was the third octet. We used that. We borrowed them all, and we turned them all on as we borrowed them. And we turned on the other 2, which added up to that. That gave us our 1,000 networks. So it's going to be over 1,000, more than 1,020. So don't forget your subnet mask and the slash indicator mean the same thing, 26. The only thing that's different here between this and a Class C is this number here tells us that it's a Class B. because if this number is 128 up to 191, that would be a Class B. If it's 192 and up, that's a Class C. If it's under 128, it would be a Class A. So we're just working with Class B today, and that's why if the professor gave you 172 for a number here, or 135, or whatever number, if it's between 128 and 191, then that's a Class B. And if we're using a Class B with a /26, then we definitely need to know it's a Class B, so we lay it out like this. A Class C, remember on my Class C video, we just used the last octet and we didn't have to deal with any of this stuff. We just worked with the last number, and now we're working with the last two. But it's the same thing. We're just, with our network number, we start with 2 under the bits and go all the way, doubling them as we go. And the same thing with the host, only the opposite direction. Your slash indicator starts with under the first bit is 17, and it goes all the way to 32. So if you have any troubles, give me a call. Text message me on here, and I'll be more than happy to help you if I get a chance. Thanks a lot for listening. Thumbs up the video if you like it, and subscribe. I'd appreciate it. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.